Welcome to Mooney Reads. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about my nonfiction summer reading. So I have a pile of books here that I curated based on the nonfiction summer bingo that the bookish sociologist over on Instagram put together. This particular readathon bingo board spans from June through August. Since June is almost over, some of the books that I'm going to be talking about I've already read, but the vast majority of them are going to be more of like TBR options. I picked at least one book for each of the prompts on there, and um, so I will not be getting to all of them, but the idea would be to get to as many as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and start out with talking about the nonfiction books that I've read already this summer. Now, each of these books that I have really fit more than one prompt in this, but I've just chosen basically one of the prompts that they go with. There is a chance that I will move them around once I get around to filling out the bingo board, but in theory, they should all basically stay in place. Especially the ones where I have multiples that are available for that prompt. I might talk about other prompts that I may decide to use them for. But we're going to start out with the books that I have already read this summer. So the first nonfiction book that I read this summer was I Hope We Choose Love by Kai Ching Tom. And this fits the prompt for essay collection. The essays in this book focus on a variety of different issues. The main thesis, however, is looking to how we can love. So being able to imagine a future within the queer community that's actually supportive in different ways. And she does this by looking at basically how we currently do community and what the issues with that are. For instance, looking at issues like abuse and how it's overlooked in the community and kind of the underlying reasons why, problems like racism, and other things like that. But there are also pieces where she talks about, certain positive experiences too, especially towards the end, kind of looking at how we might do love differently going forward. I really enjoyed this. I think that it would be interesting to see what an updated or what an update on this would look like, especially since this was written I think these were written throughout like 2015 to 2019. Oh, I think the oldest one in here is 2014. I feel like some of the discourse in this has, a few things have been added that it would be interesting to see considered in kind of what she's saying, as well as things like the pandemic. I think there's even more room to talk about how stuff, or how people's behavior has fallen short in different ways. So this was very good. The second nonfiction book that I read this summer was Taking Turns, which is a graphic nonfiction that focuses on the author's experience as a nurse in an HIV/AIDS unit in Chicago. This is both a memoir of her, while also being a history of this unit itself. So she incorporates oral histories from other people, and it's definitely my favorite book that I've read in June so far. It's definitely going to be showing up on favorites lists at the end of the year. It's so incredible because within this particular unit, they used a really different model of care to take care of these folks, especially since, she starts all of this in the early 90s. And for context, the peak of AIDS-related deaths in the United States was 1995. So she would be a nurse in through the peak, like before they have AZT. So the focus really was on a more holistic look at the person. There's a lot in there about art therapy and things like that as well. I highly recommend this for basically anybody, um, but I think in particular people who have an interest in um, queer history or medical history. I think this gives a certain look into the AIDS epidemic that I haven't experienced in the stuff that I've read so far, just because it is something like looking within the medical community, but I think looking at a very unique situation. Like most hospitals weren't run like that. But I think that it could definitely inform different ways that care can be done in certain settings. So that was really great. And shortly after, I started The Man with the Night Sweats by Tom Gunn, which is a poetry collection that is kind of a look into his experience of connection and also, at least how I understood the collection, the experience of being in a city during the AIDS epidemic. Tom Gunn is a British author who moved to San Francisco, and from my understanding, that's where he spent the majority of his time throughout the 80s. This was published in 92. And throughout this whole thing, I think not only because of, particular choices within a poem, but because of the way that it was pieced together as a collection, you can really get the, I guess, conflicting interpersonal feelings while also seeing kind of these two separate things happening within the community. You get, a lot of people who are out just living their lives, and then the community of people dealing with HIV and AIDS who are experiencing so much loss. And he talks about a lot of different things in terms of the nature of certain people. It was a really good collection. I think that it took me a minute to kind of get into what exactly his style was, but I think that also, I guess how, specifically how much he used, metaphor rather than, literally writing on something also kind of changed throughout the collection, and I think the way that he builds it is really effective. This I'm using to fulfill a book that's been on my TBR for over a year. This was one of the books that I bought when I was first starting to kind of curate the books on HIV and AIDS that I want to read. And that was probably in 2020. Then I have two nonfiction books that I'm currently reading. The first is Queercore, which I'm using for the LGBT prompt. This is an oral history of the queercore or homocore punk queer movement, starting in 1969. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in this. I do maybe have some qualms with the way that they decided to organize things, which I talk about kind of in length in the blogs and in the vlog in which I read this. But I'm not quite done with it yet. I do have a few more chapters, and I have warmed up a lot to it. But even despite all of that, it's been a really interesting read. Then the other book that I'm in the middle of, that fit for this readathon is Abolition Democracy Beyond Empire, Prisons, and Torture by Angela Davis. This is a pretty small one, and I'm hoping to read it sometime in the next couple of days before the end of the month. And this looks at the issue of prisons, policing, and how that kind of mars the democracy that's had in the United States, and also kind of reimagining what democracy might look like without these sorts of things. And this is more interviews, not necessarily essays, but it's really good so far. There's a lot in here that I really want to highlight and underline, but this is the library copy, so I can't do that. And this book will be going for the prompt of social justice. So the rest of the books that I have are going to be basically my pile of possibilities for nonfiction reading in July and August. So I'm just gonna kind of work my way through the bingo board. The first prompt is a memoir or biography. So for that, I have Upon Her Shoulders, Southeastern Native Women Share Their Stories of Justice, Spirit, and Community. So this isn't maybe a traditional like memoir, but it is like essays that are autobiographical. So I'm counting it for this. And this book is also kind of a part of the larger TBR that I've been wanting to work through that focuses on um, the Southeast, particularly looking at things like poverty and justice, liberation, kind of in that area. The next prompt in pop culture, and for that I have The 2000s Made Me Gay by Grace Perry. I don't really have too much to say about this. I 100% bought it just for like the title and cover. The next prompt is gun violence, and for that I have This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement. And I think this speaks to a really important part of the conversation that doesn't tend to be brought up in, I guess, like mainstream discussions of like gun control and stuff like that. I'm interested to see what all they have because, of course, it's talking about like self-defense. And I also have a feeling that we're going to be seeing stuff about like state violence that's being enacted on people, which I think would also be an important, piece of the conversation, looking at the issue of gun violence. The next prompt is a book that was recommended to me, and that's going to be Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. This is a collection of letters and essays that he wrote, particularly outlining a lot of his political ideas, and this was actually put together shortly before he was killed in prison. This one has also been on my TBR for quite a while, so I'm looking forward to actually getting into it. After that, we have science, medicine, and LGBT, both of which have already been covered. And then I have the prompt for climate change. And for that, I would like to read Our History is the Future, Standing Rock versus the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Long Tradition of Indigenous Resistance by Nick Estes. And I actually did start this book a while ago, but I had gotten the ebook, and I'm just really bad at reading ebooks, to be honest. So I borrowed this copy that I can actually read. The next prompt is History of Your Country. And for that, I have The Wages of Whiteness by David Roediger. And this looks at labor history in the United States and what role race played within that. This book, along with Upon Her Shoulders and This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, are actually all a part of my Southern and Appalachian TBR. Then I have a book that is the history of other countries, and for that I would like to read The 100 Years' War on Palestine. I've heard a lot of really great things about this one. It's another one that's been on my TBR for a while. I think I've probably mentioned it in a video forever ago because I did borrow this from the library sometime, and didn't get around to it, but I've got my own copy. So hopefully I'll be able to start that this summer. The next prompt is to read a book from a university press. And for that, I have Custer Died for Your Sins by Vine Deloria Jr., which was published by the University of Oklahoma Press. For the prompt of disability, I will be reading We Both Laughed in Pleasure, The Selected Diaries of Lou Sullivan. Lou Sullivan was a gay trans man and an activist who died from complications related to AIDS. And these are his diaries, which include his experience with that. The next prompt is social justice, abolition democracy fit for this, but I have another one as well. And this one could really also be good for the academic press prompt and the history of your country prompt. But that is Living for the Revolution, Black Feminist Organizations from 1968 through 1980. And this goes over organizations like the Combahee River Collective and the NBFO. The next prompt is to read a new release. For that, I have Gender Magic, Live Shamelessly, Reclaim Your Joy, and Step into Your Most Authentic Self. This is by a non-binary gender therapist and really is kind of a reimagining of the way that we kind of conceptualize not gender as in the gender spectrum, but like people's individual relationships with gender. This seems really cool, like in general, but it's particularly interesting to me because my master's thesis was on LGBT identity development, particularly looking at trans and gender nonconforming people. Mine was specifically looking at how they use the language, and in order to kind of frame the research that I was doing and inform the way that I looked at the data, I looked at a bunch of different frameworks that had been developed for identity development. So things like the CAS model, different psychological models, some sociological models for like basically the phases that people go through in understanding themselves as a queer person. So this is going to be really cool. I'm super excited. I've already talked about the books that fit into books that have been on my TBR for over a year in the essay collection. The final prompt is to read a book put out by an indie press, and I have 2 books that I could potentially read for this, although they probably fit a few of the other prompts as well if I needed to. The first is Groundings with My Brother by Walter Rodney. And this is put out by Verso. And Hillbilly Nationalists, Urban Race Rebels, and Black Power by Amy Sonny and James Tracy. And this is put out by Melville House Publishing. And this is yet another book that's on my Southern and Appalachian Liberation TBR. So those are kind of the main books. I do have some other ones that could end up coming into the mix as well. I have been going to the library more recently. So I could potentially find books from there. I also have a couple of other sets of things that I'm potentially going to pick up on the side. I have a couple of books on grief, as well as a couple of books on dinosaurs, or like prehistory sort of, that's kind of outside of my typical wheelhouse, but is like a fun topic for me to learn about, and I think could potentially be something a little lighter if I do end up getting into the grieving books. So that is my pile of possibilities for my nonfiction reading this summer. In the comments, let me know if you have any nonfiction reading plans or if you've read any cool nonfiction recently. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye.